Hi guys, and welcome to my final verdict on Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I've been playing this game since early access went live and I've sunk about 30 hours into it, so I think I've got a pretty good idea of what this game is all about and what you can expect should you decide to pick this up. As I mentioned in my previous initial thoughts video, there's definitely a lot of negative opinions on this game due to it being, a live service and the fact that Rocksteady decided to go this route rather than making, a more immersive single-player focused game that they're more known for. After playing for about 30 hours, I can see both sides of these opinions. On one hand, I love what they've done with the story in this game, and I think it's really well done and of extremely high quality. But it does come short when compared to, the previous work of Rocksteady titles. There's not a lot in the game that makes you feel attached to these characters, like you're really playing in these characters' shoes. In the old Arkham games, they did a fantastic job of making you feel like you were Batman and actually doing, Batman-esque things in Gotham City, swinging around. Here, all the characters feel sort of the same. It's because of the gun-based gameplay. Nothing really feels different other than, each of these characters' movements around the city, which in itself is great and it feels really smooth for all the characters, but beyond that, they sort of feel like, generic guys with big guns. On the other hand, it's a new direction that, is a lot more fast-paced than previous titles, and it's one of those games that you can just sort of shut your brain off and go to town on the bad guys for 30 minutes and then turn it off. It's just mindless fun. And if you like number stats and, creating the best possible build to do as much damage as possible, I really think there's a lot to like here. But if you're not into that stuff, there won't be much for you to do, after the credits roll. Getting into the story here, and I think this is one of the stronger aspects of the game. Again, it doesn't stack up against some of the older Arkham titles, but you can really tell that Rocksteady definitely put some elbow grease into fine-tuning the story here, and especially the cutscenes. They've done a really good job of making use of the material they have to work with, and it's definitely some AAA production value overall. So from a story standpoint, the evil Brainiac, he's taken over Metropolis and he's brainwashed the Justice League into doing all sorts of awful things, and it's your job as a member of the Suicide Squad to do exactly as the game title suggests: kill the Justice League. I won't spoil any of the story here, but just say that, for what you get here in the story and the production values, I think it's worth the price of admission alone here. I'm not a super DC fan, so, I'm not hung up on things like killing off the heroes and all that. I'm okay with it and how they've done it in this game, it really feels quite fun and it's quite a spectacle overall. You basically work your way, killing each of the Justice League members, getting exponentially stronger until the very end where you face off against the main villain, Brainiac. There's a few twists and turns along the way which you'll probably see coming, but overall, I found the story to be a bright spot in the game, and it's really what kept me going for the 12 hours or so that it takes. I always wanted to see what was coming next. And it's your typical Suicide Squad story though, so, if you're expecting something new that hasn't already been done before, you probably should look elsewhere. But what they've provided here is more than what you typically get for a looter shooter or a live service title, so I commend them for making it as possible as they could for this genre of games. Could have been a lot worse. So now on to the production here. In terms of graphics and gameplay, for the visual style of things, it's top-notch AAA goodness here, and I can't say enough about it. I think this is running on UE4, and, what they've managed to do here is nothing short of amazing. The cutscenes in particular, with the facial animations and the voice acting, are some of the best I've ever seen in any game. There were some times that I could really feel some of the emotion in the characters' eyes, and the banter between the squad members were actually quite funny. It's pretty top-notch stuff here.
Sure feels like we've grown as people from killing all these people. You want a high five?
Know what, Quinn? I do. Up high.
The city itself is visually impressive with some decent lighting and rain effects. There's a lot of color on display here in the city as opposed to some of the darker tones used in the previous Arkham games. Overall, I think the color palette fits with the overtop action style here, and I think they did a really good job of making Metropolis interesting to move around in and see what, Brainiac has done with Superman City. My only real critique here is that it feels really, really empty. Beyond some of the roaming bad guys in groups of 4 or 5, there's some drones and some helicopters in the sky. It's shockingly empty. There's no civilians to be seen anywhere, no moving cars. It's just a dead city. That alone might be enough to put off some gamers, but I sort of managed to look past it as I was focused on, getting to the mission objectives, and I didn't really stop that much to take a look around, but I can see how this could be an issue for some that want, a more alive city. That all being said, I've been playing on the PlayStation 5 and the overall performance has been great. It looks to be somewhere around 1440p with full 60 FPS. And it does have some minor dips when things get a bit crazy on screen, but for the most part it's been a pretty solid experience. There is no quality mode that I can see, so nothing like 4K 30 that we see in previous games and other games of this type. But I don't think that it would really be playable at 30 FPS, so I don't really see that as a downside, or at least it wouldn't be as enjoyable as it could be, at 60 FPS. As far as the gameplay goes here, you're playing as one of the 4 members of the Suicide Squad. You get to pick between Harley Quinn, King Shark, Captain Boomerang, and Deadshot. Each of the characters, as I mentioned before, they have their own movement sets. Harley Quinn, for example, uses Batman's grapple to move around. Deadshot has a jetpack. King Shark can jump outrageously high. And Boomerang, well, he uses his boomerang to, flash forced and quickly zip around the air in and out. Each character can only use a certain gun class as well, so for example, Deadshot can use snipers and assault rifles, where Harley Quinn and King Shark, they can't, but they can use heavy weapons like Gatling guns, and there's some other exploding guns that they can use. So there's definitely, a play style to choose from when you're going to see who you want to play as. There's different rarities in the weapons and equipment as well, but it's the same and it's been done time and time again. There's white, blue, green, yellow, purple, red, all the colors under the rainbow, and they all have slightly better stats and buffs than what came before. It's pretty routine stuff here. The only thing I can say is that, you're not overly bombarded with loot every time you kill a grunt or something like that, or a main enemy. They mainly come from end mission screens, so once you're done a mission, you get your loot, so you're not totally overloaded with loot in your inventory, which is a bit refreshing. You can also do the standard tweaking of the gear and weapons by swapping perks in and out for ones that fit your playstyle more. For example, I had a buff that I swapped in to give me 40% more damage against frozen enemies, which I then swapped the ability onto my grenade to freeze the enemies instead of doing regular grenade damage on them. I paired that with another 40% affliction bonus to enemies and a 35% shotgun buff to frozen enemies, and you see where I'm going here. There's a lot to tweak if you like that sort of thing, so you could really perfect the build, how you see you want to play as. And beyond just the basic tweaks, all the characters, they do all mainly play the same, though, at the end of the day. You're just shooting bad guys with all 4 members, just in slightly different ways. And this is where the game somewhat falls short. Everything feels the same. You shoot the same bad guys over and over again. You're doing the same objectives over and over again throughout the main story. There's just little variety in any of the enemy types. And, you have your typical grunts, snipers, heavy enemies, but, that's really it. And they all look the same, too. They're all purple, one's slightly bigger than the others, but I couldn't tell one from the other than what they were doing to you as shooting. You can see what they do different. The only variance is, sometimes they have the powers of the Justice League infused to them. For instance, you can get a sniper that has flash powers, and he zips away when you get too close, or one could have Batman's cloaking ability, so you can barely see them. And, these just serve as an annoyance, though, and don't really add to the challenge of fighting these enemies, and I wish they didn't have these powers and we're just regular enemies. Story missions amount to little more than fetch quests here as well. I mean, go here, rescue some guys, collect this, deposit there, and kill a dozen bad guys along the way. It's pretty bad. You do this over and over and over again. There's only about 4 or 5 different objective types, but they all really amount to the same thing, and, you know, that's a real problem. There's a lack of varieties in mission structure, and it'll likely put off a lot of gamers, and it's really my main fault with this game. The main boss fights as well, you know, they're of little variety, and it's a lot of rinse and repeat again. You know, you counter shot them, you do some damage, rinse and repeat 100 times until they're dead. They can be fun bit, but you know, on the harder difficulties, they end up being bullet sponges and really an exercise in patience and frustration.
That's the first time you've made me laugh, Harley.
And that brings me to probably the weakest part of the game, you know, the actual end game. After about 12 hours or so of the story, you get into the end game, which I was hoping to have a great gameplay loop, but it really falls flat again. I was hoping for some new activities to do, some new enemy types to fight, but no, you know, it's the same 3 or 4 missions that you've already done hundreds of times throughout the story, with a horde mode thrown in for good measure. Now there is some fun to be had here again if you like tinkering with gun stats and perfecting your builds, but it's a real grind when you're doing the same missions over and over again. There's nothing new, you're doing the same things from the story mode, just in the end game. Do it 1,000 times more. And I put about 15 hours into the end game, and you know, I can't really say that I do want to go back to it. The only real enticing thing here is, you know, getting the infamy set gear, which is the rarest tier that you can get, and it comes with harder difficulties, and you know, getting those specific equipment stats that you want. But you know, getting to those harder levels to get those stats and those guns, it's gonna even be a challenge for most to stay awake and, you know, from putting the controller down due to boredom. There's just not much here to keep you engaged long term, and with a live services model they've created here, I don't think it's got the legs to go months and years down the road. They do have a DLC roadmap which will hopefully address some of the repetitiveness of the endgame, but it isn't here today, and you know, we don't really know if that will change things, if at all, down the road. So that brings me to the end here. Is it really as bad as everyone is saying? Certainly not. There's a lot to like here with Suicide Squad, but I just don't think the way they have it structured today that it'll be a game that people are playing, you know, months down the line. The core gameplay is fun, but if they don't add more variety in enemies and missions, it's really going to fall off most people's hard drives in the next few months or so. If I had to do it all again, I would definitely say wait for a sale. You know, unless you're a hardcore DC fan or really into grinding games like Destiny and Warframe and things of that nature, you know, there is enough meat on the bones here to satisfy a story playthrough, but beyond that, I think your time would be better spent elsewhere. Overall, I'm giving Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League a 6 out of 10. If you guys like this video and want to see more content like this, let me know by hitting that like button and don't forget to subscribe.